Nice cool morning. Well, thank you all for coming today and joining us. I think what's important as we look at what is going to be probably the most predictable crisis that we've had in our nation in decades, we're here today to urge our colleagues and to urge leadership to come together to move forward so that we can address the crisis that is certainly going to be facing our nation. As a father of three, as a small businessman, I actually fear that I may be the first generation of Americans that leaves our country worse off for the next generation that I received from my parents and grandparents. And frankly, that's just unacceptable. I think we need to be empowering businesses to lower our unemployment rate. This isn't a Republican idea, it's not a Democrat idea, it should be an American idea in terms of trying to make sure we get more people off the unemployment lines and back to work. I think it's certainly no surprise that the group of us standing here today are folks that have been in favor of putting everything on the table with Go Big, as you saw early on, as we're trying to solve the crisis that's in front of us. Also, we're members who signed on, original co-sponsors of the first bipartisan budget that hit the floor in a generation. So certainly I'm proud to be standing up with them today as we look for solutions to the problems that we face. Because I do believe we should be committed to trying to find common ground. There's no question that there are areas of differences. And if we focus on those areas of differences, nothing's going to get done. But I believe that the American public is frustrated. They want Congress to act. And frankly, we know that with this fiscal cliff that's upon us, we have to act in a bipartisan fashion to get something through the House, past the Senate, and to the President's desk for signature. So I'm proud to be here today with my colleagues, and I want to turn it over now to my friend, colleague from Illinois, Dan Lipinski.
I'm glad to see so many people show up this morning for the wake of our colleague, Steven LaTourette. He still looks pretty much alive. It's a shame to see Steve leaving. He helped to bring together a bipartisan group to bring forward and lead the way with the budget a few months ago to try to put in the Simpson-Bowles bipartisan budget agreement. Unfortunately, there were only 38 of us who had the courage to stand up for it. But look, the CBO just came out recently and said by 2037, our debt will be twice our GDP. No one knows when the time is going to hit when the markets decide they are no longer going to be lending the United States government money at a reasonable rate. Everyone looks at the record low cost of borrowing right now, but that can go up enormously very quickly. I've heard estimates of 3 to 6 months we have to do something seriously, to act on this. As we go through the presidential campaign and congressional elections right now, unfortunately, everyone is saying there's not going to be any movement before then. I think the American people need to see leadership. They need to see members of both parties stand up and say, this is a real crisis. We see what's happening in Europe. There's a sense that this can never happen in the United States. But look at our debt. Look at the yearly deficits that we're running. This is not something that we can continue to put off. And we're not going to solve this problem unless both parties come together, acknowledge the problem that we are facing, and we compromise. We need to come together with everything on the table, and that's what those of us who are up here right now have done. But we're calling on our colleagues, I'm calling on the presidential candidates, the president, Mitt Romney, to come forward and really put it all on the table. Address the American people and say, this is a serious crisis that we are facing. As Americans, we need to face it together. We need to solve this together. And that's what we are here this morning to say.
About 8 months ago, over 100 of us, senators, members of Congress, held a press conference in the Capitol Visitor Center. In essence, to say that it was time for Republicans and Democrats to start working together to solve our nation's problems. There's a reason why Congress is held in such low esteem by the American public. It's not because we're pro-tax or anti-tax or for more spending or for less spending or for entitlements or defense or for less regulation. It's because the American people understand that we can't get anything done. There are a lot of great men and women in Congress of great principle. Republicans believe, I'd like to think, in lower taxes, less government, lower spending, personal opportunity, accountability, strong national security, so on. The Democrats have their views, which are perfectly legitimate. But all of the great decisions that have been made in American history have been made by people who have great principle, but are willing to compromise. And compromise is not a capitulation of principle. It's getting the nation's business done. Now, I'm going to vote today for Chairman Camp's process projection, or whatever you want to call it, because I think it's sound and I think it's a good idea. But I want to call on Democrats and Republicans to look reality in the eye. We face, as my friend from Illinois, Mr. Dold, said, a very predictable catastrophe at the end of this year. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, we enjoyed surpluses, cash surpluses. At that time, revenue was around 20% of gross domestic, 20.4% of gross domestic product, and spending was slightly less. If we're going to get back to those days of surplus, we're going to have to aim, as the Simpson-Bowles budget did, at a 20-20 balance, hopefully within the next 10 years. So I, as a Republican, a principled Republican, believe that America is calling out for us to get beyond the stovepipes of our own party and start talking about real solutions. That is how we will keep America strong and vibrant and prosperous for our children and our grandchildren.
My name is Brian Baker, and I'm president of the nonpartisan advocacy group Ending Spending. I want to congratulate and thank these members, Congressmen LaTourette, Dold, Bass, Lipinski, for their bipartisan work to solve this problem. Earlier this week, we sent a book called The Fiscal Cliff to every member of Congress in the hopes that they will talk to their constituents and the voters back home during this August recess about this crisis. Regardless of party affiliation, if these members work together and if the American people come together, we can avert a massive debt crisis in the form of this fiscal cliff at the end of the year. So thank you very much, and again, I congratulate you all for your leadership and all your hard work.
Well, thank you all. I'm on the second day of my Unchained tour. So I want to tell you that in the last couple of days, the reasons that I indicated for my retirement have been reinforced. By that I mean, if you read the news based upon the slant of the news writer, you will find on Red State blog called My Retirement the Greatest News of the Century. Now, I sent them a missive saying, now is it just the 21st century, or do we go back to 1912, because there were a lot of good things happening. The end of World War II, landing on the moon and things like that. The DCCC issued a presser that said that it's clear vindication that the Tea Party wackos have hijacked the Republican Party, and therefore that's why he's leaving. I'll tell you, that proves the point in my view. And as long as people are willing to stake out positions that feed the red meat to their base rather than solving the problem. And I tell every group that comes in to see me now, and I have been for a long time, they'll come in. I had dinner with Ken Burns and the PBS folks. We're talking about PBS funding and the markup on Labor H. And I said, listen, I've been there, I'll continue to be there, but you guys are fighting over table scraps. And if you don't somehow address the biggest problem that exists in this nation, there aren't going to be any table scraps for you to fight over. The same people have come in for the extension of the wind tax credit and all the other things that people want to talk about as their most important issue. Everybody's most important issue has to be where we find ourselves on this fiscal cliff. And, you know, for my money, Simpson Bowles, authorized by the President Obama, and held up by great statesmen, has the only reasonable blueprint in this moment in time to get us out of it. If somebody has a better idea, great. But it's going to take the big deal, and it's not going to take, you know, I'm so proud of these guys behind me who did vote on that budget alternative a few months ago, but they can't do it, I can't do it. It's going to take the leadership of the two parties. It's going to take Governor Romney and President Obama to link hands and jump off the cliff together and understand that we got into this mess together and we're going to have to get out of this mess together. Republicans are going to have to start talking about revenue. Democrats are going to have to realize that when some of the middle class entitlements were brought on board, the life expectancy in this country was 63 and today it's 79. And we have to get there. And we're going to have to go back to the day when you got 120 Republicans and 120 Democrats, and you came together, got the 240 necessary, and then, you know, let the conscientious objectors go off on, you know, Fox News and MSNBC and rail against sellouts and all the other business. But it's the only way that people are going to accept it. And you know, when we put Simpson Bowles on the floor earlier this year, a lot of the 100 people that had signed our letter didn't vote for the bill, and I was interested to read their comments like, well, the public isn't there yet. We need to educate them. The public is way ahead of the government on this particular issue. They know what's coming. So in my remaining time here, I'm going to continue to prop up and work with these fellows